Hey, good evening, everybody. My name is Jeff. I'm the national organizer at Prometheus Radio Project. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. There's also an online component to this presentation tonight. If you're not on it, you can sign on by going to anymeeting.com/PrometheusRadio1 to follow the slideshow presentation online and also join in the conversation that's happening in the chat box. That's really the most interactive space on the call tonight. Unfortunately, we can't have the call be open because there's just hundreds of people on the line and it would sound like a bunch of static. But please feel free to join the conversation on the chat. We're going to be having a question and answer period later on in the call during the last 20 minutes. So if you want to chat questions in the chat box, we'll try and answer as many as we can during the Q&A. So why don't we get started? Thank you so much for joining us, everybody. My name is Jeff Rousset. I'm the national organizer of the Prometheus Radio Project, and we're very fortunate to be joined tonight by Mr. Ramon Ramirez. He's the president of Oregon's Farm Worker Union, PECUN, in Woodburn, Oregon, and we're going to be hearing from him about how PECUN has used their low-power FM radio station that Prometheus helped them build in 2006 to win campaigns to mobilize and organize workers and advance their mission in the incredible work that they do. So we're going to be hearing from him a little later on. And once again, thank you all so much for joining us tonight on this Wednesday evening. So the agenda for this webinar, first we're going to talk a little bit about what's Prometheus, why is community radio important, go into some examples of stations. Then we're going to hear from our guest speaker tonight, Ramon Ramirez. And for the second part of it, we're going to go into the nuts and bolts of what does it really take to start a community radio station? What are the steps you need to take? So that includes the availability of new stations, where are these stations available, who's eligible to apply, how much does it cost, so the next steps to get started and to get support. Because if you want to do this, most of the groups we're working with have never built radio stations before. They've never even been on the radio before. But you're not on your own. We're here with you. So we're going to talk about how you can get that support. And during the last 20 minutes of the call, we're going to have some time for Q&A. So the Prometheus Radio Project is a nonprofit organization based in Philadelphia. We're a 15-year-old organization, and we build community radio as a voice for community expression and as a tool for social justice organizing. Now, really, the reason why we exist is because of media consolidation. Because over time, the media have become less and less accessible because corporations have taken over a bigger and bigger share of it. Today, Clear Channel owns over 850 radio stations across the country, as well as billboards, entertainment venues, and more, which is why we hear the same songs and the same commercials over and over from coast to coast on most stations. And what really lacks is local coverage and local artists. So most of the information we get, whether it's TV, radio, book publishers, magazines, is produced and distributed by a handful of corporations whose interests are often very different from the interests of the communities consuming the news. And we've seen big media serve as a platform to promote anti-union, anti-immigrant, anti-choice policies. And we believe that when communities need our own media, we can combat the stereotypes and get our own version of the stories out and use that to change our communities for the better. So for the past 13 years, Prometheus has helped hundreds of local organizations to build their own radio stations. Today, over 800 low-power FM radio stations are on the air. However, new opportunities for community radio were limited by Congress, particularly in urban areas. So we spent much of the past 10 years leading a grassroots legislative campaign on more community radio stations in urban areas, where a single station can reach more than 100,000 local listeners and have a really massive impact. And we won. The Local Community Radio Act was signed into law in January 2011. It directs the FCC to create more opportunities for low-power community radio. We expect to see new stations in many cities, including some of the biggest cities in the country. And we think the number of low-power stations on the air today could double or triple. This is a chance for communities to own their own media infrastructure. And there's a role for everybody on this call to play in building this movement. So we want to identify groups who are going to actually submit applications this October to build radio stations. But even if that's not you, even if you're not with an organization that's going to apply, you can still participate by helping us connect with those groups and supporting in other ways, which we'll talk about later. So why community radio? Why radio in particular? We believe in community radio because, one, it's transformative. Community radio stations have to clean up toxic waste, organize voter drives. They're transformative for the listeners. Radio is transformative for the listeners, and it's also transformative for the people who are producing the radio. And thanks for the feedback, by the way, everybody in the chat. If it keeps breaking up, please let me know, and I'll try and see if I can change anything. So community radio is transformative. It's also participatory. There's a low barrier for engagement. So stations involved with local community and programming and decision-making. There's lots of community radio stations that have youth involved. They are affordable. Most big radio stations cost hundreds of thousands of dollars to put on the air. Low-power stations cost a small fraction of that, with ample time to fundraise, which we'll discuss in more detail later. And they're a multimedia platform. Stations can easily integrate with new technologies. We believe the future of community radio looks like multimedia community centers. For example, one of the stations we helped get on air, WRFU, in Urbana-Champaign, Illinois, has a video editing studio and broadcasts free Wi-Fi to the community. They also have an art gallery and performance venue. Of course, you can also stream content online and help build your web presence. People often ask us, why not start an internet radio station? And the fact is, we've got some of the internet radio stations in the country beating down our door because they want an FM signal in order to reach their local community. So this really isn't about radio or internet. This is radio and internet. This is a tool in your community's toolbox. And these stations are local. They cover school board elections, local bands, local issues that matter in a given neighborhood and community or in a local city. Many community groups and nonprofits have a media strategy that can often be limited to sending press releases out to media outlets in order to get stories out. But oftentimes, the media either doesn't cover those stories, or often they misrepresent the issue and the people involved. And so this is a way for us, for communities all over the country, to build our own people-powered media outlets where we can control the story, control the narrative, and control the media. So here's some of the stations that we could help get on the air. You can learn about more stations by going to prometheusradio.org/station profiles. WCIW in Immokalee, Florida, is run by the Coalition of Immokalee Workers, and they've used it to organize farm workers in the fields of them. They've won historic campaigns against McDonald's, Burger King, Subway, and Taco Bell for workers' rights and for human rights. And they've used the radio to really mobilize workers down in the fields and to learn about their rights. WQRZ, Katrina Radio, was the only station broadcasting after Hurricane Katrina wiped out all the big commercial stations and took out the power. The internet was down in Hancock County, Mississippi, and the station manager, Bryce Phillips, who you see in the picture here, actually would keep the station running off the power of a car battery. So that's also part of what we mean by local, is that you actually control the hardware, the tools, the pipes. You control that locally and use it for your local mission. And there's lots of different models. Of course, these stations have been used for everything for emergency broadcasting to organizing workers to sharing and promoting local art. KOCZ in Opelousas, Louisiana has been used to preserve and amplify Zydeco music, which was born in Opelousas, Louisiana, but you couldn't hear it on any of the commercial stations until they started playing it on this community radio station. Now all the commercial stations play it. WSCA in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, has a lot of eclectic programming. They have an environmental show, a public affairs and music show, a show called All Things Gay, and of course they have lots of youth programming too. As you can see, youth play a big part of that station and many community radio stations. And now we're very fortunate to be joined by Ramon Ramirez, the president of Oregon's Farm Worker Union, Pekun. Prometheus helped Pekun to build a radio station in Woodburn, Oregon in 2006. And we're going to hear more from Mr. Ramirez about how they've been able to use that station to advance their mission and their goals. Thank you so much for joining us, Mr. Ramirez. Can you start by just talking about what is Pekun?
Yes, first, thank you for allowing me this time to explain a little bit about Pekun and Radio Movimiento, our low-power radio station in Woodburn, Oregon. Pekun is Pineros y Campesinos Unidos del Noroeste. Our English name is Northwest Tree Planters and Farm Workers United. We are a 6,000-member farm worker union in the Willamette Valley in Woodburn, Oregon. We started the radio station back in 2006 with the help of the Prometheus radio project. And the reason why we started a radio station is that we were clear from the very beginning of our organizing efforts that the tool, the power of the radio was really needed to get our message across to the community. In the Latino immigrant community, radio is by almost everybody. We've seen that in 2006, also the mass mobilizations that brought millions of immigrants to the streets all over the country against the Sensenbrenner bill and the immigration reform was done primarily through the radio. So we understand the power of the radio. We had a local community. We had purchased sometime a local community radio station, and we're thrown off the air after about 6 months because we were using the radio as an organizing tool to organize farm workers. And the owner called us in and says, "I'm throwing you off because you're using it as an organizing tool. You're organizing workers." And he says, "Sure, that's why we told you up front that that's what we were going to do." But nonetheless, he told us that we were banging away at his friends and organizing against his friends and threw us off the air. So we understand the power of the radio, and we know clearly, completely what it feels like to be censored in America. So with that, we learned that the low power dial was opening up. This was in 2000. We made an application. We got the license in 2006, and we started. With the help of the Prometheus Radio Project, had a barn raising where they helped us bring 300 volunteers from around the world. Actually, we had people from Venezuela, Nicaragua, Mexico, France, Canada, and a number of other communities. And one weekend, pulled together the radio station, built the radio station. And not only that, but they taught us how to do local fundraising, how to raise the money, and how to be creative in terms of strategies around building a radio station. A lot of the feedback we get from people when we talk about Radio Movimiento, the voice of the people, which is what our radio station is called, that they have problems with the fundraising aspect of it. That their ability to raise money, is really is a barrier. So we learned different strategies of how to raise money. The kind of programming that we use is we're definitely using the radio to organize farm workers and the immigrant community. Radio Movimiento in Oregon has become the voice of the immigrant community. So we're broadcasting every day. For example, currently we're broadcasting all the hearings that are going on in the Senate on the immigration reform. We also have a LGBTQ program geared towards Latino immigrant queers. And so it's the only one of its type in our state. And so, like the recent DOMA decision in the Supreme Court, we've been running stories all day on that. The other thing is that it's also a tool for organizing. We're organizing communities that have never had a voice in our community. For example, we're broadcasting right now in 4 different languages: Purépecha, Mixteco Bajo, Mixteco Alto, Trique, and also in Spanish. So we're giving indigenous communities from Mexico and Central America a voice. They got programming going in different languages, and they're starting to organize into into hometown associations. So the radio becomes an organizing tool for leadership development in our community. people are not only programmers, how to pull together an hour, 2 hour program. They involve their community. They're involved in planning. They're involved in interviewing, and so it's an awesome tool to build leadership in your community. In fact, one of the strategic ways that we've been able to get funding, because a lot of foundations will not give you money directly for building a radio station or maintaining a radio station, but you can frame it as a leadership development tool in the context of an organizing grant with a number of progressive foundations, and that's how you sell it. The other thing that we've done is we've done some really unique fundraising campaigns where we get our allies in the different communities, especially our union friends like SEIU, AFL-CIO, OEA, different unions to become our partners. So they become our sponsors, and they sponsor different programs. So at the end of the program, we say this program is sponsored by the AFL-CIO or by SEIU, fighting for worker rights in America. And so we do that. So our whole program, radio program, is union, where it comes with a union and a pro-immigrant perspective. And so that's how we were able to raise money. I think that's one of the number one barriers in terms of fundraising for a station. And Prometheus is really there to help you develop these skills and to teach you how to raise money locally and in other ways. I would say that if groups are considering about starting their own radio station, I would do it in a heartbeat. You have a number of organizations like the Coalition of Immokalee Workers, PICUN, the Prometheus Radio Project that are here. We're here. We want to be generous with our experience, our time, and share our resources and share our expertise and help you build your organization, build your radio station so that you can really make a difference. For us, my advice is that it's not only a way of organizing your community, about mobilizing and creating leadership development, but it's about building political power. It's about once you got that particular medium, the organization is immediately respected as part of the medium. So in Spanish, hacemos parte del medio, which means that we're on par with the other nations and other means of communication, which gives us a lot of access and so forth. So today, I'm here to say that we're here to help you if you're considering building a radio station. This is perhaps the only time in the near future that we're going to have the opportunity to build radio stations, progressive voice with a community voice, with an immigrant voice, labor voice, and a pro worker, farm worker perspective. So I think it's really important that, especially those organizations that are in urban areas, seriously considering applying for the application from the FCC. One of the things that we're open to is if you would like, we can invite you to come to Woodburn, Oregon, see our radio station, see our operations, how we put it together. That way, you have a better understanding of how to do that. It's not a lot of. It's not really hard to do it. It takes a lot of work, but it's not that hard. And I think I can imagine the time when we have hundreds of local community organizations, and even national organizations having their own voice on the radio, and then us all together networking and building a voice for those people in our communities that don't have a voice. That's just awesome power, that the potential that we have to build that.
Well, thank you so much for sharing all that, Mr. Ramirez. It's definitely very inspiring. Can you just share maybe a little bit about who powers the station? How many volunteers do you all have? I know one thing that folks are probably thinking is that they just don't have the capacity right now because everyone is so busy working on so many other important issues that it's hard to just think about where can we find the capacity to build this. But is it true that this can actually be a tool to help build your capacity and not just take capacity? Can you maybe talk a little bit about that and the volunteer aspect of it?
Yeah, the volunteer aspect is really important. We at Radio Movimiento La Voz del Pueblo we have currently 3 staff people. We never had 3 staff before, but we've eventually evolved into 3 staff, full-time staff, and 1 part-time. But we use about 50 volunteers. But we also altogether use several hundred volunteers over the period of the year, because we're currently on a local fundraising campaign where we're getting people to donate $1, just $1. And it's a measuring stick to see how much support we have in the community. And I think last year did a one day $1 donation, and we were able to get about close to $1,500 in just one day. So we're doing that again to see where we're at in terms of community support. So we use a couple hundred volunteers. There's about 50 volunteers, I would say almost full-time, working on programming, working as programmers, and then production. So the volunteer base is very, very important. We do about more than 50 hours of local programming. And so we're also developing partnerships with different community organizations. We have, for example, CAUSA, which is statewide immigrant rights group. They have a program on Radio Movimiento, and they bring in their volunteers. I think they have about 6 volunteers. Las Mujeres Progresistas have their program. They have their own program. They have about 4 or 5 volunteers. So altogether, the volunteers that we have really are what makes the radio program. And I'll tell you that once you put out the word that you give that the community can actually get involved, you start organizing meetings about building the radio station, building your own radio station. The leaders in the community will surface, people that have had experience, people that want to be on the radio. And we do a lot of youth programming. So we do partnerships with the high school, with our local high school, and also with the community college to bring in potential young programmers. So volunteers are that's what's going to make it. And so we pay very few people, but it's really supported by the community. The community, for example, donates. We go to all the businesses, and they donate. We are starting to develop relationships with different colleges and universities who want to advertise, doing non-commercial advertising on our station and to get the word out to the Latino immigrant community. So there's different ways that volunteers plug in, but they're the heart and soul of the radio station. So you don't need a whole lot of money. You just, in Spanish we say, you need a whole lot of ganas, that you need a whole lot of commitment.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for sharing that. And are you going to be able to hang on the line for the next half hour?
Yes, I will. I can answer questions if you have.
Excellent. Great. So we're just going to move on. I'm going to go into some of the nuts and bolts about what it takes to start a radio station, and then Mr. Ramirez will for the question and answer period if folks have any more questions. Once again, please feel free to chat your questions into the chat box, and then we're going to get through as many as we can during the Q&A period. Thank you so much for sharing all of that, Mr. Ramirez. We really appreciate your time and taking the time to talk about
Thank you very much.
Station. Thank you. So, what's the availability of new stations in the U.S.? Again, we fought for 15 years to make these stations available, not only in rural areas, but also in big cities. And we won. And so what that means is that there's going to be massive availability of new low-power FM radio stations all over the country. The only cities in the top 50 cities in the country without space for new stations, unfortunately, I'm sorry if you're in one of these places, is New York City, Detroit, Guaynabo, Puerto Rico, Pittsburgh, and San Bernardino, California. So those are cities that won't have any availability, at least in the downtown area. There may be some availability outside it, but also outside those cities it might be difficult. And one of the reasons is that, in a place like New York City, it's just so crowded with radio stations, you literally can't squeeze another one in. But in Chicago, in LA, in Miami, in New Orleans, in Philadelphia, Dallas, Austin, you name it, there's going to be lots and lots of radio stations available. And in some of those big cities, one radio station can reach over 100,000 local listeners, plus stream online. So we're talking about a really massive impact that we can have with this communication tool. So the next question is, who is eligible to apply for station? So you need to be an organization. You have to be a nonprofit organization. You can't be an individual, and you can't be a for-profit business. But you don't have to be a 501c3. So schools are eligible for unions, 501c3s, 501c4s, emergency response teams, religious organizations, and governments are all eligible. You need to have an educational mission, and that's broadly defined. So most nonprofit organizations have some kind of educational mission, whether it's educating people about workers' rights or about the environment or immigration reform. If you're a nonprofit organization, you've probably got some kind of educational component that you can work to the mission of the radio station. And you need to be local. So somebody in New York can't start a radio station in California. Your headquarters has to be within 10 miles of your radio transmitter, or your board of directors has to be within, or most of your board of directors has to be within 10 miles. So how much does it cost? You can start a community radio station for $10,000 and up. One really important thing about this number is that it's not an upfront cost. So the application and license themselves are free, and the application is available online right now. The FCC finally is up on their website this week. The only upfront cost that you need to apply for the license this October is to hire an engineer. So basically, you're gonna, these stations have a reach of 4 to 20 mile. They just circle that's 4 to 20 miles across. And so you need to think, what are the neighborhoods, what are the areas that you really want to target, where you really want to reach listeners? And basically you'll talk to an engineer and say, if I really want to reach this part of the city, what's the best frequency for me to apply for, and where do I need to put an antenna? And the engineer will do a bunch of technical studies and give you some coordinates for where you need to place your antenna in order that your signal won't interfere with other existing stations. And then you take those coordinates and put it on the application that you submit in October. That's where the engineering comes in. So engineering studies typically run between $500 and a couple $1,000. Sometimes they're free, and sometimes they're a little more expensive. And we've got resources to help connect you with engineers. After that, after you actually get what's called your construction permit, after you apply, if you win a construction permit, then you need to actually build a radio station. And studio equipment can cost $5,000 and up. Transmitting equipment can cost between $4,000 to $12,000. Now, after you get your construction permit, you have 1.5 to 3 years to fundraise that $10,000 to build the station and to go on air. So you've got time to do it. Again, this isn't a one-time opportunity. This is a one-time opportunity, but this isn't an upfront cost. You've got several years to fundraise the money. And again, we'll help you. And like Mr. Ramirez said, there's lots of different ways to raise money for this project. And what are the ongoing costs? We estimate that ongoing costs are about $10,000 a year and up. That includes rent, utilities, people power paying for staffing, paying people's time, music licensing, equipment, and supplies. Of course, you can save money by having equipment donated. You can save money with volunteers, and most successful community radio stations are largely volunteer or all volunteer powered. And of course, the radio station is not just an expense, but it can also bring in money. So stations bring in money with pledge drives, on-air pledge drives, grants like Mr. Ramirez mentioned, underwriting, building relationships with local businesses. Having concerts and events is a whole new avenue that the radio opens up to you. And of course, donations from the community. So what's the timeline now that we're looking at? So just last week, after a 15 15 years of work, after a 15-year campaign, the application finally released, the FCC finally released the application online on its website for new low-power FM radio stations, and you can find it at fcc.gov. Also, if you sign up with us, we can help direct you to that. The next important date is October 15th, 2013. So the FCC is going to open up a 2-week filing window from October 15th to October 29th. And it's only during those 2 weeks that you can submit applications for new radio licenses. After that, there's going to be a bit of a waiting period. Between 2014 and 2015, the FCC is going to start awarding licenses. And then we estimate that between 2014 and 2018, hundreds of new community radio stations will be going on air all over the country. Now, if you're in a rural area, there's less competition for licenses, and you can be on air sooner. If you're in a big city, there's probably going to be more groups applying for fewer frequencies, and it might take longer for the FCC to sort through that. But between 2014 and 2018, we're going to see hundreds of new stations go on air. So what do you do first? The first thing to do, if you're with an organization that is interested in starting a radio station, it doesn't mean that you're totally committed or that you have, an engineer or that you have all the answers figured out. But if your organization is considering starting a station, you need to fill out a group profile at prometheusradio.org/applicant support by this Friday in order to be eligible to get lots of intensive support from Prometheus to help you through this process. This is our last week of outreach in this 15-year campaign, which I keep on mentioning, because we really want to make sure that the groups we work with are going to have a strong chance at getting on the air, at winning the licenses, and building these stations. And so between now and October, there's some work that we need to do. And so we really want everybody to get in the door by this Friday so that we can adequately support you to do all the work, to connect with the right resources and with the right people to help make this happen. So please, if you're thinking about this opportunity, if you're with an organization or if you know an organization that would be good for this, get in touch with them and encourage folks to fill out an applicant profile on our website by this Friday. And that's how we track the groups that are interested and the groups that we're going to be supporting. So, of course, like I said, help us spread the word. If you're not with an organization, you probably know some organizations. And so we encourage you to reach out to your allies, reach out to your partners, reach out to other organizations in your community or organizations who you may have relationships with across the country, and encourage them to come to our website to fill out a profile and to get involved. Another thing you can do is join radiospark.org. RadioSpark is a website that we built that helps to connect applicant groups like yourselves, nonprofits who are thinking about starting a radio station but don't have any experience with radio, to connect with folks from existing radio stations, from the existing community radio community, as well as with engineers and Prometheus staff to get support and resources that you need to start a station. So it's like an online social networking hub. It's like our Facebook, but it probably won't take up as much of your time. But fill out a profile on radiospark.org and get involved. And of course, our services include free training webinars, an engineering directory, monthly e-newsletter, a phone help desk, training guides, equipment guides, and more. But again, you'll get the access to all of that if you fill out a free applicant support profile at prometheus.org/applicant support. So, and we're also going to be sending you a follow-up email tomorrow with lots of resources and links to all of this stuff. So don't worry if you haven't had time to jot down all of these links. We'll be sharing them with you. So now we're going to get to the question and answer period. Want to hear from you all about what you're thinking. So we're going to be, if you have questions, please chat questions into the chat box, and we're going to go through them and answer as many as we can. Again, if we don't get to all of your questions tonight, please don't be disheartened. We hope that this is the start of a conversation, of an ongoing dialogue, and not the end. So please chat your questions if you have questions. So one question I see, what if I want to start a nonprofit? What if you want to start a nonprofit? So if you want to start a nonprofit, the rules are different depending what state you're in. The rules are different depending what state you're in, but you probably have time to start a nonprofit. However, one thing that's important is that the way that the FCC determines who wins a license is based on a point system that they have. So it's not based on the content of the station, because that's protected by free speech rights. But one of the criteria, probably one of the more important criteria, is if you've been around, if your organization has been in existence for 2 years or longer, you get what's called a preference point on your application. And so groups that have been around for more than 2 years will have an advantage in the process, especially in more competitive markets. Can a group of community organizations and nonprofits apply for a station together? No, they can't. Each organization needs to apply individually, but we definitely encourage you to reach out to other organizations and nonprofits in your area to also get involved and to apply, because you all will have opportunities to then work together on the station. Are there any penalties if you win a license but can't complete the job? No, there aren't any penalties. You can, no, there aren't. But of course, you would lose the costs of engineering. Why is the cost of an engineer so expensive? Well, part of it is that there's not that many engineers, and so they can kind of control how much they charge. Also, if folks have questions for Mr. Ramon Ramirez, please feel free to ask questions. He's also a wealth of information. There's a question about fiscally sponsored organizations. If your organization is a fiscal sponsor, as far as I know, you're not eligible. It's the actual nonprofit entity that needs to apply for a license. However, if you have partner organizations that have nonprofit status, you can work with them to apply and then to share the programming. Again, there are lots of different models of how these stations work, but the groups that get the license aren't always the ones who do all the programming. So if you can also have a sponsor for the radio station. If you have close relationships with a nonprofit in your area, they can also apply and do all the paperwork and be responsible for the station, and then open up their doors to undocumented youth or workers or whoever else in the community is going to be actually running the station, doing the programming work. There's a question about what's required to do the engineering study for ourselves. Well, one thing is I mentioned radiospark.org, and if you go to RadioSpark, we have free engineering software on that website. It's called R-Free, and you can do some of the basic studies yourself, which will, I mean, one thing you can do is type in your zip code, and it'll tell you exactly what stations, what frequencies are available in your area, whether it's 100.3, 103.5, whatever. These stations are all up and down the FM dial. Go to radiospark.org, create a profile, go to R-Free, which is the engineering stuff, where within that website, you can put in your zip code, find out what frequencies are available, and then the engineers you connect with can also use that software to do more advanced studies. Also, in some cases, you'll be able to do your studies for free without paying an engineer by using R-Free. You need to create a profile on radiospark.org. There's a question, what if you have an online radio station? That's fine. That does not prohibit you from starting an FM station. You are still, you still need to meet the same criteria, though, of having a nonprofit status. And again, this isn't, you don't have to be a federally recognized nonprofit. You need to be a state recognized nonprofit. There's a question about AM radio. These stations are only FM. There's a question about international borders. That does affect it. So the reason why Detroit actually isn't eligible is because it's too close to the Canadian border. It's actually Canada's fault that Detroit can't apply for a radio station, unfortunately. And if you're too close to the Mexican border, there are similar limitations on the power. If you're within a certain miles of the Mexican border, then you're only able to have 50-watt stations as opposed to 100-watt stations, which are the typical ones. So definitely, reach out to us and let us know where you are if you're close to the border, and we'll be able to look specifically at your situation and tell you whether you are too close or not. But also, if you go to R-Free on radiospark.org and put in your zip code, it should be able to tell you what frequencies are available. Does a public library qualify? Yes, libraries are eligible. How does the FCC choose between groups who end up with the same points? That's a good question. In some cases, those groups will have to work together. And so, again, it's helpful to reach out to organizations who are your partners and allies, because you might be working with them if you all are in that kind of a situation where there's a tie. And a local public access TV station host a radio station? Yes, we're actually working with public access television stations all over the country to integrate radio into their platforms. How many organizations will be approved per market? That depends on the market. So, for example, in Philly, there are 4 frequencies available, which means that there's room for about 3 to 4 stations, because sometimes stations are mutually exclusive, so one station might prohibit another station from popping up. So again, check on radiospark.org and how many frequencies are available, and it's possible that if there's 5 frequencies available in your city, that you can actually build 5 stations, or it might be that if there's 5 frequencies available, because of the locations and the specific technical details, that you can only build 3 or 4 of those, because they would interfere with each other. Can a school still qualify if they own an existing radio station? No. If you own a radio station already, you are not eligible to apply for a low-power FM radio station. And that's to prevent the kind of mass media ownership that we have today. Again, there's lots of companies and networks that would love to just buy up all the low power stations that are available, and I'm not suggesting that your organization is one of those, but in order to prevent that, we worked with the FCC to create rules that one organization can only apply for one license, and if you already own a radio station, you're not eligible to own a low power FM radio station as well. There's a question about rural areas and expanding the reach of low power stations in rural areas. I think low power FM radio stations can use transmitters to expand their signal. I've also heard that there is in the FCC some folks working on actually increasing signal strength for low power stations in rural areas. So there's a possibility that in rural areas in the future, not this time around, but in the future, you may be eligible to apply for an upgrade to a 250 watt station. Somebody asked if you can repost the seminar. Yes, we're going to be sending out a recording to everybody tomorrow, which you are more than welcome to share. We also have past webinars recorded on our website. If you go to the archives section, it's prometheusradio.org/archives. What if you don't own a radio station but have a show on the Pacifica Radio Network? That's fine. That's fine. If you have a show, that's fine. It's just if you own a radio station, an organization that owns a radio station can't own another radio station that's a low-power FM radio station. Are these new frequencies? Yes, these are new frequencies. So what we're doing is, before the FCC didn't allow radio stations to be too close to each other, which is why there's a certain amount of static between radio stations when you turn the dial. Now we're actually squeezing small stations in between existing stations on the dial. So yes, these are going to be new frequencies. Nobody's getting kicked off the air, and nobody's ownership of their stations is changing hands. These are completely new stations that we're squeezing in on the dial all over the country. Somebody's saying Friday is a really short notice to reach out to nonprofits and other unions. Can we expand the time frame? So Friday is still, if you can reach out to other organizations by Friday to fill out a profile, that's ideal. That's when we're going to be determining, hopefully, most of the groups that we're going to be supporting deeply through this process through October. We have a station torchbearer program, which you can learn about if you go to prometheusradio.org/support, where groups that meet our criteria will get very intensive support from us between now and October. But of course, our materials are always available online, and you can always plug into our website. So please don't stop doing outreach after this week. Continue doing outreach after this week, and we'll continue to provide support to groups. But we can't guarantee that folks who get involved with us after Friday will be eligible for really deep, intensive support from us, because we're trying to have that all figured out by the end of this week. But please continue doing outreach and get in touch with me if you want to get other organizations involved. And my email is up on the screen right now. Somebody's asking about music royalty pricing. I actually don't know very much. Mr. Ramirez, do you know about music royalty pricing for online and LPFM. I'm sorry, I don't know much about that topic, but again,
yeah, there is a cost. There is an annual cost for using the service. There's a service available for nonprofits. So there's a minimal cost. It's something like around, I want to say between $300 and $600 a year, so that you could play music on the radio. And you also have to document the music that you play. So in addition to paying the cost, you have to also record the songs that you play.
Right, and of course that's for playing copyrighted music. If you're playing local artists from your community or from your neighborhood, obviously you don't need to pay them anything. But if you're playing copyrighted music, you do need to pay. And somebody is giving out some more specific numbers in the chat box. Also, if you want to play syndicated programming like Democracy Now!, I think Democracy Now! Is $265 a year to play on a low-power FM radio station. Somebody asked about the point system that the FCC uses to determine who wins a license. If you go to prometheusradio.org/checklist, that's prometheusradio.org/checklist, you can see specifically what's the point system that the FCC uses to determine who will win licenses. Somebody's saying they're trying to use RadioSpark. Again, if you go to radiospark.org, create a profile, and then there's a portal in there called R-Free. And I think it's rfree.radiospark.org if you want to go there directly. And that's the engineering software to find the frequencies. And again, there's no, I see people talking about programming. You don't need to have 24/7 programming right when you start a station. That's not something you're required to do. So you can actually start off with limited amounts of programming and then build your way up to having 24/7 programming. If you don't have 24/7 programming, you're not going to get kicked off the air. But again, even out of that 24/7 programming, it doesn't all have to be local. So you don't actually need to have DJs in the studio at all hours of the morning playing music. You can play syndicated content. You can rebroadcast shows. So don't, get frightened by the amount of work that it'll take to produce all that programming. Because, another thing that we're hoping to do with these stations is to actually build a national network of stations that can share content and share programming with each other. Somebody is asking about EAS, which is the Emergency Alert System. And yes, low-power FM stations do need to comply with emergency alert systems. And that's basically something that the government requires every radio station to have, so that if there's an emergency, so they say, they can kind of intervene and broadcast emergency information through the system. And so I've got 2 minutes left. Ramon, is there anything else that you would like to add at this point before we sign off?
I would just like to add that if you're interested in coming to Oregon to see Radio Movimiento La Voz del Pueblo and PECUN, we have a website. It's pecun.org. Send it to us. Send it a request to us. We have actually a group coming from New York and another group from Florida in the month of July and August. So we're interested. People from Los Angeles are interested. Well, actually from outside the Los Angeles area. So there's already groups already notifying us. So please submit your request, and we'll try to honor it.
Wow, thank you so much. That is a very, very generous offer that Mr. Ramirez has just put out to the 400 people who registered for this webinar. Thank you, and you know, if you're considering this opportunity, that's just an invaluable experience to actually see how a community radio station works. An awesome community radio station like KPCN. Thank you so much for being on the call, Mr. Ramirez. We really appreciate your time. For those of you who are not on the West Coast, there might be a community radio station near you that you don't even know about that you may want to check out. It may be successful, or it may not be. Again, these stations have varying levels of awesomeness, but it's still a learning experience, and so we would encourage you to go out and get involved with your local community radio station, or go visit them. And if you want to plug in with us to see if there's one around, definitely feel free to email, and then we can help connect you with some stations who may be around. Are there any final questions before we wrap up? Yeah, so it's 9 p.m. Thank you so much for joining us, everybody. We'll send you a follow-up email. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us on this Wednesday night. We're really excited to work with you. Again, if you're scared of this opportunity, don't be. We've got resources. We can help you. Lots of groups have done this with little to no resources. What you do need is a commitment and a drive to do this and to change your community and to have a voice. And we want to help you do this. We want to help you make this happen. So please get in touch with us. Stay involved. Reach out to others. Tell others about this opportunity. It's a one-time only opportunity, the largest expansion of community radio in U.S. history, and the work that we do over the next 4 months will determine the course of the media landscape for the next 40 years. It's true. Thank you so much for your time, and we look forward to staying in touch.